She arrived third from the end. Not last, not first. The position of a woman who has spent enough years in rooms like this one to understand that visibility is a choice, and that the correct choice, when you are attending a ceremony built around someone else's name, is to be present without demanding to be seen. She wore her good shoes anyway. They were cream-colored with a small heel. She had bought them 2 years ago for a dinner she no longer remembered clearly, and they had lived in their box since then, waiting for an occasion worthy of them. She told herself that morning while lacing them that she was wearing them for herself, that it had nothing to do with today, that a woman is allowed to dress well on any morning she chooses. She almost believed it. Her name was Sophia. She had been connected to the royal family for 4 years, not as a guest, not as a distant admirer, but as someone who had been quietly considered. One of the women the court had observed the way courts observe everything, with interest that is careful never to become commitment. She had attended their events. She had spoken with the right people. She had never once asked for anything directly, because women in her position understood that asking directly was the fastest way to be shown the door. She had learned patience the way people learn to live with bad weather, not happily, but thoroughly. The prince's name was Edward. He was not a cruel man. That was the thing people who pitied Sophia never quite understood. There was no villain in this story, which somehow made it harder to carry. He was simply a man who had looked at 2 women and made a choice, and the choice was not her. He had chosen Lady Clara, a woman from a well-regarded family in the north, with blonde hair and a confident laugh and no particular history with Sophia at all. They had announced it 3 weeks before the ceremony. The court had murmured its approval. The arrangements had been made. Sophia had received the news in a letter which she read standing at her window, and then she had folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer, and she had gone downstairs and had lunch and not told anyone anything about how she felt. The drawer stayed closed for 3 weeks. The morning of the ceremony, she dressed slowly. Her room was quiet. The house staff moved around her with the particular softness of people who know something has happened to someone and are choosing not to name it. Her maid helped with her hair without saying anything unnecessary. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of women who understand each other without requiring words. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She was not the most striking woman in the court. She knew this. She was the kind of beautiful that took a moment to find, the kind that lived in the way she held her chin, in the steadiness of her eyes, in the way her face never did more than it needed to. Other women were more immediately impressive. Clara was more immediately impressive. Sophia had always understood this, and had decided somewhere along the way that she would simply be the kind of woman who lasted. She picked up her small cream bag. She walked out the door. The hall was enormous. It was the kind of room that had been designed to make individuals feel small. High ceilings with carved detail, tall windows through which the autumn light came in sideways and made everything glow slightly gold. Rows of chairs filled with people who had dressed very carefully and were now trying not to look like they had dressed very carefully. Soft music from somewhere she could not see. She took her seat third from the end of the 7th row. The row gave her a clear view of the front of the hall, where the ceremony platform sat elevated by 3 shallow steps. The velvet cushion was already there. On the cushion, the crown. She did not look at it for long. Clara arrived with her family. She was dressed in white and silver, and she moved through the hall with the ease of someone who had spent the last 3 weeks imagining this exact walk and had practiced it in her mind enough times that it now felt natural. She was beautiful. The room agreed with this quietly, the way rooms agree with things, a shift in attention, a slight lean forward, a gathered stillness. Sophia watched her take her place at the front. She put her hands in her lap. She kept her face pleasant and neutral, the way she had learned to keep it in rooms where her feelings were not the point. Edward arrived last. He was dressed formally as the occasion required. He walked in the way men walk when they know everyone is watching and have decided to seem as though they do not know. He took his position at the front. He did not look at Sophia. This did not surprise her. She had not expected him to. The ceremony began. The officiating elder, a gray-haired man named Lord Hartwell, who had overseen more royal proceedings than anyone currently living, spoke with the measured pace of someone who understood that his job was to give the moment its proper weight. He spoke about duty. He spoke about the lineage of the crown. He spoke about the importance of the choice being made today, and what it would mean for the family and for the court. Sophia listened to all of it. She listened the way you listen to something you need to get through. Then it happened. Lord Hartwell paused. It was not the pause of a man building toward a dramatic finish. It was the pause of a man who had received unexpected information and was taking a breath before deciding how to proceed. He leaned slightly to his left where a younger assistant stood holding a folded piece of paper. He read the paper. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes moved. He whispered something to the assistant. The assistant left quickly through a side door. The hall was not yet disturbed. People sat in polite waiting, assuming this was simply a procedural moment, the kind of small pause that happened at large events. Clara stood at the front with her hands together, her expression still composed. Edward stood beside her, slightly stiffer now, though perhaps only Sophia noticed that. The assistant returned. He whispered again to Lord Hartwell. Lord Hartwell straightened. He held the paper for a moment, then set it aside. When he looked up, his expression was that of a man who has been given a task he did not expect and intends to carry it out correctly regardless. He spoke Clara's name. He spoke it with a sentence attached to it that the back rows could not fully hear, but the front rows could, and the front rows stiffened. Clara's mother touched her arm. Clara looked at Lord Hartwell with a careful expression that lasted exactly 2 seconds before something in it shifted. Then Clara gave a single nod, small and precise, and stepped back from her position. The hall understood that something had changed. It did not yet understand what. The silence that followed lasted long enough that people began to move slightly in their chairs. Eyes traveled. Whispers started and stopped. People near the front craned to see what had happened. People in the back tried to read the faces of people near the front. Sophia sat still. She noticed her hands in her lap. She noticed the way the autumn light was falling across the cream fabric of her skirt. She noticed, for some reason, that the flower arrangement on the left side of the platform was slightly uneven, one stem taller than the others, listing gently to the right. She was looking at that stem when Lord Hartwell spoke her name. He said it once clearly, in the voice of a man who does not need to repeat himself. She looked up. He was looking directly at her. The hall followed his gaze. She had the strange experience of feeling every pair of eyes in a large room arrive on her face at the same moment. It was not a pleasant sensation. It was also not a frightening one. It was something else, something she did not have a word for, something that lived in the space between being invisible and being seen. She stood. The distance from her seat to the platform was 9 steps. She counted them. Not because she needed to. She counted them the way hands move to familiar objects when the mind is moving too fast. The counting was something small and manageable in the middle of something very large and unmanageable. 1, 2, 3. She kept her chin level. 4, 5. She did not look at Edward. 6. She did not look at Clara. 7. She kept her eyes on Lord Hartwell, who was watching her with an expression of complete steadiness as though this were always what was going to happen. 8. 9. She stopped at the base of the platform steps. Lord Hartwell nodded once. She climbed the 3 steps. She stopped before him. Up close, he was older than he looked from a distance. His eyes were gray and very calm. He had the look of someone who had lived long enough to stop being surprised by the way things turn out. He lifted the crown from the cushion. It was gold with a simple design, not heavy-looking from a distance, not dramatic in the way some people imagine crowns to be dramatic. But when he placed it on her head, the weight of it was immediate and real. It settled against her hair. It was heavier than she had imagined. She had not imagined it. That was the truth she would carry with her afterward. She had not allowed herself to imagine it. There are things you refuse to picture when you are trying to protect yourself, and the crown on her own head had been one of those things. She had looked at it on the cushion that morning and made herself look away. She felt it now. Heavy, real, and entirely unprepared for. The hall rose. Not all at once. First the front rose, then the middle, then the back, in a slow wave that started from the people who could see most clearly what had happened and spread to the people who were still understanding it. The sound that came from them was not a cheer exactly. It was larger than a cheer. It was the sound of a room changing its mind about what it had expected to feel today and discovering that the new feeling was stronger. She turned to face them. The hall was on its feet. All the carefully dressed people with their careful faces were standing and looking at her, and for the first time in 4 years, the looking was not something she needed to manage. It was simply what was happening. She looked back at them, not at individual faces, at the room as a whole, as a single breathing thing that had gathered itself around this moment. She let herself take it in, she let it be real. On the edge of her vision, she could see Edward. He was standing as everyone was standing. His expression was not cruel, it was not happy. It was the expression of a man watching something occur that he had not arranged and could not undo. The expression of a man who has made one choice and is watching a different one be honored. It lasted a few seconds. Then he composed his face into something more appropriate for the occasion, and she did not look at him again. There were things she would think about later. She would think about Clara, who had handled the moment with a grace that Sophia would always privately respect, stepping back cleanly, without protest, without making the room uncomfortable. Whatever had happened, whatever the reason was, Clara had made it easy when she could have made it difficult. That meant something. She would think about Lord Hartwell, who had carried the change without flinching, who had spoken her name into a room full of people who had not expected to hear it, and had done it with the same weight and ceremony as if it had been planned from the beginning. She would think about her shoes, the cream-colored ones she had bought 2 years ago. She would think about how she had laced them that morning, telling herself they were just shoes, just a choice she was making for herself, and she would understand, standing in them now, on a platform in front of everyone, that she had known. Some quiet part of her had known, the way quiet parts of us sometimes know things we are not ready to say out loud, and that part of her had put on the good shoes and come anyway. She would think about all of this later, in a private room with no witnesses. Right now she stood with the crown on her head and the room on its feet, and she kept her face composed and her chin level, and she breathed. The days that followed moved strangely. People who had looked through her for 4 years now stopped to look at her directly. Invitations arrived. Letters came. People she had met only briefly at distant events wrote to reintroduce themselves, as though they were offering her the gift of their renewed memory. She read the letters with a particular feeling she did not share with anyone, something that was partly amusement and partly sadness, and mostly a kind of weariness for which she had no clean name. She answered every letter. She answered them politely and warmly and without a trace of the feeling underneath. She had learned this long ago, not as a performance but as a practice. The difference between performing composure and practicing it is that one is a mask and one is a skill. She had built the skill over years in rooms where her feelings were not the point. It served her now. It would continue to serve her. She took on the work of her new position steadily, the way she took on most things, not dramatically, not with visible effort. She learned what needed to be learned. She asked the right questions of the right people. She made decisions carefully and stood behind them when they were made. She was good at the work. This surprised people who had not been paying attention to her. It did not surprise the people who had. History would remember the ceremony. It would record the date, the hall, the crown, the name of the officiating elder. It would record that a selection had been made and then reversed, and that the crown had ended up on a head it was not originally intended for. History would note this with the particular neutrality it reserves for events that turned out to be more significant than they seemed at the time. It would not record the 9 steps. It would not record the flower arrangement with the listing stem, or the cream shoes, or the maid who had done her hair in silence that morning, or the desk drawer with the letter inside it, or the 2 years the shoes had spent in a box waiting. It would not record the moment before she turned to face the room, when the crown had just been placed, and the hall had not yet risen and everything was still suspended. The half-second in which she felt the full weight of the thing, physical and otherwise, and simply stood there inside it. That moment had no witnesses. It belonged only to her. She stood in it and the crown was heavy, and she did not put it down.